Hi, welcome to this video. Over the last few weeks I've had quite a few emails in asking for help on how to tackle the anthology question on the AQA paper. In particular the power and conflict. Apparently most of you are studying the power and conflict themed poems. So this video is going to take you through an approach to that question with a few specifics, but kind of in general terms. How do you revise for this topic, and how do you actually address the question that might come up in the exam? Okay, so how do I select which poems to compare? Well, the short answer is to adopt a conceptualized approach. And what does this mean? Well, simply that you should look to compare poems that share a similar theme or story, not poems that are structured in the same way, but the idea behind a poem is quite similar and you can compare it. For example, in the AQA Power and Conflict section, both Remains and War Photographer explore the effects of conflict on an individual once they've returned home from a war zone. Now, the obvious difference between them is that one is a soldier and the other is a photographer, a war photographer. So, how do you divide the poems up based on themes? Well, this is something that you'll find a lot of your teachers walking around the classroom with. It's the CGP Power and Conflict book, and that's it there, the front of it. Oh, there we go on the camera. And inside the front page, you've got this table, this grid. Now you'll see down the left-hand side, you've got all the poems, and across the top, which is what's great, is you've got a breakdown of all the themes. So checking your eyesight's all right, and turning my head to the side, you've got the power of humans, the power of nature, you've got the effects of conflict, you've got the reality of conflict, you've got loss and absence, you've got memory, you've got then a whole series of negative emotions, so anger, guilt, fear, pride, and then identity, and then individual experience. So this is for illustrative purposes only. I mean, you can grab a hold of a copy of the CGPA book online easy enough to tell you where it's taken from. It breaks down all the themes covered and how they fit with each poem. This is also useful for deciding which poems to focus on in the final run-up to the exams. As, for example, it would make more sense to cover a poem that contains a lot of themes, like War Photographer, which has got 6 themes, rather than Ozymandias, which has only got 3. But I'll get on to what poems to revise as you get closer to the exam in a minute. So how to decide which poems to compare? Now again, just to reinforce what I've said, remember a conceptualized response is more effective. This simply means you should select 2 poems that tackle a similar idea or theme, and then compare the similarities and differences with how they explore this idea or theme in terms of language, form, structure, and effect. I'm an examiner as well. The examiners are checking for 2 things. One, demonstrate your understanding and knowledge of the poem, but also to explore language, form, structure, and effect. And I'm going to say method and meaning now, and I'll come back and explain what I mean by that. But it's language, form, structure, and effect should form the focal point of everything you write in this question. So, for example, both Ozymandias and My Last Duchess, I mean, this question is from last summer's exam. Both Ozymandias and My Last Duchess explore the power of man. The difference is that Ozymandias explores how nature undermines this power over the passing of time, with the statue of the once great ruler Ozymandias now crumbling abandoned in the desert, whereas My Last Duchess deals with the consequences of the power of man over the individual, and how this too can prove problematic, as the Duke, despite ensuring all smiles stop, still feels his emotions running out of control every time he thinks of his last Duchess. Ozymandias uses the sonnet form to convey its ideas, with the turning point, the volta, in line 9, in keeping with the Petrarchan style. However, it doesn't follow the usual rhyme scheme of the sonnet form, perhaps to reflect the way that human powers and structures can be destroyed by nature. Method and meaning. Your method there is your sonnet form, your turning point, your volta, your meaning, the lack of rhyme scheme, and your meaning then, or your effect, can reflect how the way that human powers and structures can be destroyed by nature. By contrast, look at my comparative connectives, I'm comparing all the time. My Last Duchess adopts the form of a dramatic monologue with rhyming couplets to reflect the Duke's ongoing quest for power, but the use of enjambment throughout reveals a rather unstable character whose desire for control controls him and his resultant anger runs away from him. So this is an example of how you should consider which poems to compare with which. There will inevitably be overlaps, which reduces the amount you will need to remember. Okay. So the next step is to identify 5 or 6 poems to revise fully. Now, look, my reason behind this, the rationale behind this is there are 15 poems on the exam. I mean, that's a huge amount. It's a memory test. So give yourselves a little bit more of a chance. So divide maybe kind of thin down the poems to 5 or 6, but make sure they're from a broad area. So that's where you can use that the grid from one of the previous screens. I've selected, and you can select any ones you wish, but I've selected the following: War Photographer, Kamikaze, The Prelude, London, Poppies and Storm on the Island. I mean, you may decide on a different selection based on your own reading of the 15 poems. No, but my selection cover all the themes between them. Now, we don't want any of these or your selection being the printed poem, because these are the ones you're going to revise fully. You're going to know these intimately. You want one of the other poems, which you'll know as well, but not as well as these. You want one of the other poems to come up because you've got the text in front of you, so you can remind yourself quite easily then, what techniques, what devices are there, how it's laid out, the structure, where the ideas form, and the effects, and so on. It'll come back to you, and then you can use one of these 5 or 6 to compare to it. So look, it's by no means an exact science. I mean, the more poems you can analyse, the more options you'll have on the day of the exam. And just a pointer here, the only 2 summer exams that we've had in the new SIS syllabus, in 2017, Bayonet Charge was the printed poem, and the question was about the effects of war. And last year, Ozymandias was the printed poem, and it was about ideas of power. Okay, so method and meaning. Method is your technique, your device. Meaning is your kind of interpretation, your understanding, or the impact of that, the effect of that technique. So for each of the poems, a little bit of revision. You can jot down notes on the story, the tone, mood of the poem, the context, form and structure, language, any other techniques, and the effect of all those throughout. Now, over the next few screens, I'm going to provide you with all the content you'll need for the 6 listed poems. I won't talk you through the screens, so please pause and take notes as we go. I've taken this from, on my website, I've got some AQA guides, and I've taken the following pages from those guides. Remember also that there's a video lesson on each poem. So each poem I've given a 10, 12, 14-minute video breakdown of what the poem's about, what the key areas you need to remember, and analysis, a line-by-line analysis. And also on the website you can download and or print off the accompanying PowerPoint, as you will be able to do with this one as well. Okay, so remember, I'm going to kind of whiz through these, so do pause and take notes. So here's War Photographer, and I've broken it down, what's the poem about, the title, themes, context, form, structure, language and imagery, summary of the main devices used, useful vocab to use when analysing, and links to other poems. Okay, so do pause, and I'm just going to carry on. There's War Photographer. There's Kamikaze, good luck with your eyesight. You can enlarge it. There's The Prelude, London, Poppies, and the final one, Storm on the Island. Okay, so you've got those. Now, just to finish off, I've taken a couple of exam questions, examples of exam questions, and then I've written the first kind of introductory paragraph for you. Now remember, it's a comparison question, so you'll need to compare, and you haven't got a huge amount of time, so try and score your marks as quickly as possible. The examiners do suggest that a little introduction is useful. In the introduction, you want to introduce the second poem as quickly as possible whilst comparing and directly addressing the question. So, for example, I've got 2 examples for you. The first one: compare how poets present the effects of conflict in Remains and in one other poem from Power and Conflict. So what I've done, both Remains and War Photographer explore the effects of conflict on the individual once they've returned home. So I've got both my comparative connective, and I've introduced the second poem and directly addressed the question immediately. All that done in the first sentence. Now, remember, we're comparing these poems on a concept, an idea, a theme. So Remains is based on the true story of a soldier suffering from PTSD, having returned from Iraq, whereas, so there's context, comparison, whereas War Photographer focuses on the reflections of a photographer back in his dark room in England, waiting for his pictures to develop. Okay? Second example. The question is, compare the ways poets present the power of the natural world in Storm on the Island and one other poem from Power and Conflict. So here I go again. Both, comparative connected, Storm on the Island and The Prelude explore the power of the natural world and its impact on man. So introduce the second poem and directly addresses the question. And it tells the examiner how I'm comparing, or why I'm choosing this poem to compare. In Storm on the Island, Heaney describes a rural community preparing for the arrival of a storm and how their confidence slowly ebbs away once the full force of nature reveals itself through the storm. By contrast, the Prelude perceives the natural world in a more passive way. Wordsworth describes an experience he had when he took a boat out onto a lake. Everything was going well, he was feeling strong and confident until he noticed a huge peak appear on the horizon, after which he becomes intimidated and overawed by its sheer size and power and has to return to the shore. Okay, so a little bit more information about why I've chosen the two poems, about the kind of the story, the concept behind each of the poems. And off I go then, and my next paragraphs will be formed of content on language, form, structure, okay, and the effect, and drawing comparisons throughout. Okay, a lot of information in this little video. I hope you found it useful. Hopefully that's provided a little insight into how to approach revising for the anthology section. Again, if you're doing love and relationships, you follow the same procedure, the same process. I think CGP have a love and relationship book as well, guide as well. If you're doing Edexcel, conflicts, OCR conflicts, similar approach to take. Okay, good luck, happy revising.